Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Bryant Francis. We've got something a little different for you today, an interview with NexusMods CEO Victor Folmann. Now, we rarely cover modding on Game Developer, but this player-driven practice is deeply woven in the heart of game development. Not only do a number of successful developers start their career as modders, but developer relationships with their modding community have boosted the lifespans of games like, Stardew Valley, Fallout New Vegas, and Mountain Blade 2. It's literally the original model for user-generated content. Without modding, games like Minecraft might be major hits. And so many of those games mods are hosted on NexusMods. Today's episode dives into Folmann's vision for the platform, the complexities of running a company making effectively an open source product, and the complex relationships between game developers and the players who mod their games. Enjoy! And Victor, welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. It's so exciting to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Brian. I am just as excited about being here today. So thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. Nexus mods. So mods in general, like, good Lord, I think mods are, as long as there has been video games on PC, there have been mods. Software is this beautiful thing where players, within various boundaries can take it and modify it for themselves. It's a form of creative expression. I can think of all these reasons why I think the modding scene has persisted over the years. I can think of so many examples. But you, as someone who sits atop a mod platform, why do you think this trend has persisted so much, and why? What do you? Yeah, I guess that's the simple end of the question. Why do you think mods are as popular now, if not more than ever, than as over the years?
So I think in order to answer that question, we probably have to go a little bit back in time to when I first experienced, my first experience with mods, and that goes back to the early days of Half-Life, turning that into Counter-Strike. I'm personally a big FPS player, so I spend vast majority of my time when I'm not with the kids or family playing Counter-Strike, or Warcraft, where you played certain mods and that turned into Dota and so forth. And I think the most expensive thing for publishers to invest in is content. And it's the continuous investment into content. And I think some of the macro tailwinds that we're seeing with huge platforms such as Roblox and Minecraft have sort of paved the way for user-generated content and also mods. And I think that we are at a very interesting moment of time with, let's call it, a new UGC native generation growing up inside of these platforms, where customization is just becoming a baseline expectation. So I think what has happened over the years is that, 10 years ago, when you were sharing a screenshot of yourself playing Minecraft with your friends on Facebook, you were legally infringing the right of the IP holders, which is, a little bit insane to think about. But I think that mods, particularly in sort of the RPG genre, have proven out how much longevity it actually creates, and therefore also why studios benefit from mods. So I think that's the short answer.
Yeah. You say short answer, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess technically we could almost go year by year in modding history because the very subtle tweaks and changes to the mods to players' relationships with UGC. The reasons that modding persists are as evolving as mods themselves. Although I have to ask, obviously you alluded to Warcraft. I remember growing up and seeing games like Age of Empires, that had their own custom, level makers. Like these were the UGC, this word we have for it, is not new. In a very abstract sense, all video games are UGC, but then our brains are breaking and words don't mean anything anymore. But from your perch, what has it been like to watch the enthusiasm for UGC in, I would say, the game development business sector? Some developers are obviously excited about it, but what has it been like to sort of watch this hype around Roblox, this demand to make like Roblox fast follows? What's it been like to sort of watch it and go, hey, this has been happening the whole time. We've been here the whole time. Like, what's it been like to watch that happen, I guess?
I think it's excitement. It's excitement about breaking down walls that has been inherited from, I think, a very regimented way of looking at what UGC represents. It's certainly not a new phenomenon. It's been around for decades, and I think it just takes time around adoption for being able to understand what some of these new types of environments or form of entertainment are actually driving. And so I think there's been a big educational piece in terms of seeing platforms like Roblox or Minecraft succeeding at scale, and really building out a platform and a ecosystem where you certainly have the platform that benefits from it, but equally also the players and more importantly, the creators who are contributing towards building awesome experiences that millions of people they get to enjoy. So it's been both a slippery slope of understanding what it looks like. And some of the studios, frankly speaking, they take it in house. We're a firm believer at NexusMods in open modding. It's what we stand for. You will never, in the time in where I operate the platform, see paid mods. It's a no-go. It's a non-negotiable. So we're a firm believer in open source and have a thinking around that mods should be free. It's for people to come in and experience. And certainly, it's taken time for many studios to understand that dynamic of entertainment and the change that has driven that.
Yeah. Yeah, what kind of pressures? Paid mods is such an interesting conversation. Literally, some of my first stories when our site was called Gamma Sutra. Now, we have our new shiny different name, game developer. Some of my first stories covered a brief plan, I believe, from Valve to try and build it was Valve or Bethesda. I'm blanking on which. I really should have looked this up.
I think it was Bethesda. I mean, Bethesda.
Yeah, Bethesda. Yeah, they were trying to do paid mods, and I recall outrage. I recall anger, like from the community. You guys didn't even say anything. Like, what do you think sparked that? I guess what is underlying this belief that mods should be free? I guess.
Yeah, I think it comes back to where mods they stems from, and how it has been in the past. I certainly think that with some of the initiatives that Bethesda has done with creation and been doing paid mods, you sort of took something away that was free and started paywalling it, and that is always a very difficult sort of position to take something that is free and start paywalling it. It brings up a whole other question, which is, creator monetization, and should the job be to create a economic incentive for people to create mods? And certainly I can speak on the behalf of the, millions of people who come to NexusMods and create. That vast majority of them, they do it for passion, and we are the infrastructure that allows for that passion to happen. I will say that I would not be surprised that if we saw a change in this dynamic happening over the next couple of decades to come, some of that being driven by, again, this new UGC native generation we're seeing growing up inside of Roblox and Minecraft that are used to making a living, and I'm talking about making a big living, of actually creating new experiences for people. How that will play out, I think it's hard to tell. It's certainly not what we are in business for. We're not in business to help creators make money. We're very proud of our donation point system where we have paid out, I think it's close to $17 million now to creators. But it's not the core of what we're doing. We think a lot more about ourselves. Like on the creation side, I like to talk a little bit about what our vision is at NexusMods, and for some people it may be hard to understand. But I talk about what we're doing as an operating system of UGC. And I'm not talking about building Linux here. It's an expression of trying to articulate the nodes that we see connecting. And what we mean with this is that it should be Spotify easy to play a mod. Think about it like you browse, you click, and you play. And it should be GitHub powerful to publish, collaborate, and manage your mods. And I think we're still quite far away on delivering on that promise. And that's what we are spending all our awaken hours on trying to solve and get to that.
Yeah. Yeah, Steam. And by the way, I quickly in my second monitor pulled up. It was actually Valve in 2015 that had tried a paid mod program, and it crashed and burned in 4 days. For a history lesson for listeners. Steam. That said, Steam Workshop has sort of hit the mark that you're talking about, right? It is in Steam. Certain creators who are also free to put their stuff on NexusMods have made it is certainly possible in specific cases to sort of just like follow a mod, and then it's there, it's ready to go, and it's in your application. Steam obviously has, this platform native thing going on. It has an advantage that you guys don't. But you're still here. One, this didn't seem to undermine your business at all, and two, it seems like now you're saying, you want to achieve something similar, right? I guess like the best way to turn this into a question is when they rolled out the workshop feature, when they made it easy, to do that click feature that you're talking about. What was your reaction, I guess, about that inside the company? Was it excitement, anticipation? Like did you see it? I guess, yeah. Where were your thoughts when that happened?
So every time new changes are happening in the industry that makes playing a mod easier, I get excited because I'm in the business of solving this problem of making modding a one-click experience. And so I think there is plenty of room to have multiple different players in the market to actually go out and help support build that. I think Steam has done a phenomenal job in terms of workshop and obviously have an advantage for also being in the business of selling the games. We're not in the business of selling games. We're in the business of allowing creators to create great experiences and for people to enjoy those experiences. Some of the things that I think leads a little bit into the way that we're thinking about it is a little bit more of a composable system of primitives. And with that in mind, I think we are still sort of figuring out how we can solve some of the core fundamentals in terms of how a mod functions. I'm derailing the answer to the question a little bit.
No,
but
please.
But I do think it's important for the context. And so I think if we go a little bit back in time and look at the music industry back in 2003, I believe it was, with sort of Napster coming out and in the early days of music, we all went to the uTorrent and BitTorrent of ours, and we downloaded music and we extracted it and put it onto our fancy MP3 player. And when Spotify and sort of iTunes came around, initially, it had a advantage, which was that the MP3 file was already made. In modding, there isn't really a standardization for what a file is. And so that is effectively what we are focusing on at NexusMods. It is turning NexusMods from to be respectful, a file hosting company to a UGC company. And that's what we're working on every day very hard, is to create a standardized framework that makes it easier for creators to create and follow a standardization, but also for players to enjoy getting to the magic moment, which is, to get in and play the actual game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To standardize how mods work in games, because certainly, like, if there's one thing that's kept me from diving more into mods myself beyond just a Steam Workshop, like, oh, I'm going to click on a mod. My favorite modding project of all time is KOTOR 2, The Sith Lords Restored, which was this, they hosted on your guys' site, this huge effort to restore cut content for a game that I love, that I think is so challenging, and it helped the developers themselves, sort of see more of their original ambitions come to the world. Pardon the tangent, my tangent there. But from the NexusMods point of view, you alluded to it there. There is no one way. Mods have to be downloaded. They have to be put in certain files. Maybe other settings have to be set. Certainly, whether it's creation kit content with Bethesda, that makes it easier. If you're replacing models in a Capcom game, I expect it's harder. And yet still I see Thomas the Tank Engine in Resident Evil games, like replacing the big bosses on so many occasions. Does the conversation around making installing mods easier, has this led you guys to initiate conversations with large PC, companies releasing games on PC? Have you been trying to sort of explain to them the value of setting up easy to install mod infrastructure? Has that been part of your project?
It has certainly not been a part of the strategy looking backwards. We are a neutral platform. We are infrastructure that we provide, and we currently do not have plans to work directly and integrate into studios. We have an open and vibrant community that contributes and support. Our desktop mod manager, Vortex, is open source as well. And that's sort of in the DNA that we are building. However, we certainly have a lot of interest from many different studios that wants to work together. And I think we're still trying to digest our own view in terms of how we can do that. And here I'm more talking about how can we natively integrate what is the closest things to a one-click experience to make sure that more people, they get to experience what a mod is all about. And as you alluded a little bit to, I mean, some of the challenging things when you do not own the game files is obviously that you will have a hard time of let's call it reverting back to the vanilla version of the game. And, you may have a BIOS that have certain settings or a graphic card and, whatnot. And so effectively, how a lot of this has been done in the past is that you go to a mod page, you download a mod, and you sort of go into a description where you have 20,000 comments of people who are sitting and troubleshooting, and you have screenshots, and you have people who have different settings. And I think in the end state, we're looking to figure out how can we make a machine reason and understand about this file to actually, do conflict resolution and make sure that we can, get the mod to function. That is tricky when you do not own the game files. So when you have publishers that are sort of forcing out updates, and I think that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing a little bit with Steam at the moment. As somebody who's also using Steam Workshop, I have no issues saying that as well. It is one of the challenges that from time to time, it auto forces an update, and all of a sudden the experience you have spent hours on setting up breaks. So I think then we start going into, how can you do pinned versions of the game to sort of, get to know that you can get into a version that where the mod actually functions and works. And I think the pretty interesting things when we look at it is that, the best metric that we currently have on Nexus today, and we are again trying to move from being a file hosting company to a UGC a platform, is that we can see when people, they download mods. We can also listen to if they install the mods, but we have a hard time resoluting that back to when a new update comes out because we don't sit and listen on that. So those are some of the things that we on I would say, strategic lenses are thinking more about, how can we get closer to deliver what should be hopefully one day a seamless experience.
Yeah, that's sort of funny enough, this relates to GOG's mission with its game preservation program, and it's they are doing specific backend work, to help keep games compatible, but also they create a system where players, can sort of have this, like consistently stable version of a game with more ability to predict, if mods can work on it. And it's such a fascinating topic because certainly I don't think anyone begrudges developers and publishers, using Steam, like the vast player audience, they want their games working the best. They want compatibility issues resolved with tech. They want new content, and Steam's update systems on other platforms have been a magnificent way to do that. But I've certainly seen, when Bethesda updated Fallout 4 to Fallout 4 HD, for instance, suddenly all these mods broke, and this robust community, that was around Bethesda's games was very frustrated by that. So I think this is sort of one of those, like, if you don't think about games as software, but you think of them as content. And look, I'm going to be 100% straight with you. I think about games that way. I'm not casting shadow on this. I think of the game as the content I experience, and then I move on from, as opposed to the modular pieces that that are. I guess for work I pay attention to it, but that seems to be such a challenge, right? To sort of help people see that that their games, their products are more than, the content, are more than the purchase, right? That they are something modular like that. That's not an easy thing, I guess, to get people to wrap their head around, I suppose. No question mark at the end of that, just a comment.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the nail there. Those are, I think, both from a publisher point of view, education, but also from a player point of view and from a creator point of view,
Yeah.
it is educating people about understanding, the dynamics and the phenomenon that sits around UGC in general.
Yeah. So it sounds like, to step back a bit, you talked about the native the Nexus mod app that can be downloaded on players' computers. It almost sounds like a vision going forward for being, going from a file hosting site to a UGC platform is some, in the best world possible. If I'm a player and I see my friend playing a mod and I go, oh my God, I want to play that. And today, if I'm not very technically experienced, like I could muddle my way through it myself, but I would not have a good time. My friend, might ask my friend, hey, can you just install this for me? Because they've done it. And my friend goes, absolutely. And they do it. And it sounds like an ideal version of what you guys are proposing would be a way for your software to sort of be that friend, right? To use, you said sort of machine-based, learning to understand what a way to get that push to click work so it feels invisible, so I don't have to get my friend to come over, so I don't have to do that. Am I accurate there? Am I accurate that you're sort of like trying to help that's where you see sort of this kind of work going towards, I suppose?
Yeah. I certainly think that's a good way of expressing it, and I think it would be another very interesting topic for you to actually dive deeper in with one of my partners here at Nexus, our CTO, because I think he can talk a lot and make good I think comparisons to Java and some of the early days of what that looks like, and also how you drive ecosystem adoption around that, because in some shape or form, it is difficult to change people's behavior. So with something like this, obviously we have an unfair advantage because we are, de facto the biggest PC modding platform on planet Earth. And so we have a few advantages in terms of being able to sort of, manage and creating a steering group. But eventually it has to come from the creators and the communities to actually take that adoption in and be a part of writing that story together with us. So we're thinking a lot about how we can do that, how we can have an open-minded discussion with the contributors in the community. And also, some of them we've hired at NexusMods. It's one of the things that we like to do is hire from the community. And boy, are there many very, very talented people out there. I've been quite blown away by the amount of talent we've found in the community.
Yeah, this sort of speaks to, you talked about open source philosophy, right? Not like running Linux, or not sort of the FOSS, the free open source software, sort of viewed as a abstract thing for technical nerds, but open source as a philosophy, as a structural integrity. This sort of speaks to what you're talking about with running an open source company, right? Like, as an open source company, especially when you don't have any legal rights to access those game files, you don't get to sort of force solutions down on players. You have a foundation to build code here. If we're talking about code abstract, code and then content, and then they are making content. But the content makers, who themselves are also sometimes making code, they make the like mod installers for their games. Sometimes they go, okay, we've made kind of our own mod manager. You sort of don't have a choice, right? You can't just go down and say, here is how we install mods, because for not just from a technical legal perspective, but from a how you're structured. That's what it sounds like to me.
100%, and that's why a steering group is necessary to drive adoption around those communities, because effectively they have to do that. And I think it talks a little bit into the strength of NexusMods, and also why I'm very excited is sort of the the inherent network effects that lives on the platform. The more creators, the more mods, the more players, the better mods, the better creators, and that's a very good sort of ecosystem that also stems from what open source stems from. And so I think there are many of the same dynamics that are being true, as you alluded to, in the way that we're thinking about going about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Open source, obviously, I think actually for a brief step back from mods specifically, I'm so fascinated when I meet people running open source companies. I've met the Godot team. I've met, the Godot Foundation folks who also run W4, which is a company, but that's for specific, more bespoke Godot features. I met Jim Whitehurst, who was interim CEO at Unity, had formerly been CEO of Red Hat, and you guys have such a different job, I feel like, than most other leaders and executives in the industry that I meet because of the open source structure. I don't think the right question, I'm trying to phrase the question in my head. I suppose, like, what is, from a company operation standpoint, like, how would you describe the best principles for running a company, making a product, in this case, as we've said a few times now, the file hosting service that is becoming a UGC service. How do open source companies, do you think, how would you quantify them as running differently than other companies in our industry, I suppose? How do you sort of think open source works through a company perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that it keeps you honest, because that's a very important thing, and I think it's the strength of, let's just call it UGC gaming adjacent sort of platforms that reach a scale, is that it keeps you honest for the communities, for the creators, and for the developers. So I think the sort of philosophy that we are seeing this through is that it's a constant sort of conversation with understanding how the communities and the contributors are supporting, but also having some sort of I like to use the expression, we're firm on vision, but we are loose on details, because we need to be flexible enough to sort of pivot where it makes sense, and also be firm enough on some of our grounded values in terms of what we believe in as a philosophy and as a company. And I think the short version there is that mods should be free. They will always stay free under my leadership. And what we are really building is the infrastructure layer beneath that makes these experiences available for millions of people to go and enjoy.
Yeah, I was having another conversation with another developer who I unfortunately can't name as of this time, but we were talking about like infrastructure layers on the internet, right? And that if you're trying to build, and advance what societies do with software, I'm being very abstract here. We were talking about some heady stuff, but we were talking about how conventional corporate logic says, you try and essentially become the rent keeper, right? The landlord. But this more open source, this infrastructure focused thinking is what enables people to make the thing, that becomes the cycle of mods, right? The League of Legends spinning off from Warcraft, the PUBG growing out of DayZ mods, the excuse me, it's not easy if you don't. I would say, as someone who, like I said, I am, by my values and experience and how I perceive the world, I have come through it games as this content mind, right, versus software and infrastructure mind. And I think it is such an interesting thing to try if you're not from that world, if you didn't grow up, like learning how to mod, if you didn't grow up in sort of the more like open internet, information being as free as possible mindset. It can be hard to wrap your head around, I think. Do you ever find that, I'm maybe repeating a question from earlier, but like, do you ever find explaining this infrastructure focused approach like challenging? I'm not even going to say to people to compete. I don't know. I guess, do you ever find it challenging, I suppose, like to convey this to people, I suppose?
So, I mean, the short version is yes, extremely. I think that it depends again who do you want to communicate it to, and certainly when I try to explain to my mom what we are, you sort of need to use the expression of a Spotify or a Git. Well, she has no clue what GitHub is.
Yeah.
But you get the point. But certainly it is difficult, and I think many turn to the phrasing of an operating system because it sort of fits the bucket of at least an expression of trying to talk about infrastructure. But I would say we care deeply about product at Nexus, and so we're not just talking about creating an invincible sort of layer, but we're talking about both creating enough open source mindedness for people to contribute. We have a little bit of a mantra that said we have a API thinking, and API thinking is an expression of saying that we should keep in mind with our core contributors in the community of how they can actually support us. But on the other hand, we also need to make sure that with not just the audience that we have today, but also with new audiences growing up that are used to have a one-click experience, that it doesn't become too technical.
Yeah.
And I know that I will probably get a little bit heat from some people in the community by saying this. And I know from personal experience, I also love to sit in different folders and extract files. And it's a part of sort of, going back down memory lane of when you did that. I remember having, awful experiences with World of Warcraft and some of the plugins that you sort of had to, install there. But for a large portion of people, they want to come in and just have that sort of one-click experience. I think to a point that I just thought about, which are going back to one of your questions on, what has sort of changed some of the dynamics with studios. I have found myself that it's pretty interesting that we are at a point in time right now where a company like, Blizzard and in terms of World of Warcraft, have started shaping some of the rates that you're making about, sort of understanding that the people who are running those raids will have all these add-ons installed or will have these plugins installed. And they're sort of building the games around the understanding that has happened, that shift has happened. And I think that's a pretty interesting sort of way of just seeing that studios are also defining the guardrails around certain mechanisms of the users having advanced statistics on performance, or some of these boss fights can be extremely challenging if you had to play them the vanilla version, that reminds me of my
I rated how high did I get in rating? I got through Blackwing Lair was a regular raid. We started doing Naxxramas before it turned over. I was a vanilla WoW. I was vanilla WoW through whatever came after Burning Crusade. These are memories that are very familiar.
I mean, I'll give you a little bit of a story. So the name Chosen, which is the company which I am the CEO of as well. The name Chosen, it stems from a guild that I ran on Arch and Dawn, where we were called The Chosen, and so I never made it to Nax or Blackwing Lair. I've certainly rated a lot of Onyxia and Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, but I wasn't as good as you, unfortunately.
Good. We'll dally here from the topic. I was a Retribution Paladin in a day where Retribution Paladins were very looked down upon, and I've actually mentioned this on the podcast before, some of my experience with that. But no, you're taking me back to the days of Thoughtbot, to the days of some of the plugins I had, even as like a mild teenage raider. I mentioned I wasn't that into the file extraction modding scene, but wow, like the way it makes me appreciate what you're saying about Blizzard's continuing. And I suppose I believe this also is taking place with Square Enix and Final Fantasy 14, that these very popular online games and the companies behind them have met a little bit, have been forced to. I was trying to avoid that phrase, but like their players certainly sort of led them to, hey, we love these tools and we need these tools, and you could either make all these tools for us or we could just make them for ourselves and make them what we need, while you guys make the game content. Is certainly kind of orbits what you're talking about with community. Speaking of values, you mentioned there, company values. In 2022, you guys did face a new kind of challenge to your values, which was when this user whose name I realize is now a inappropriate pun, so I won't repeat it, uploaded a mod that removed the pride flags from Spider-Man Remastered, and you guys had to make a post where you sort of reckon with, look, we're not here to dictate what can and can't be mods, but you chose to take this mod down, right? And I think in my head over the years, I've heard stories, about how you guys, err on the side of inclusion when it comes to mods and, not supporting hateful mods or some such. Have you guys were pretty concise and transparent at the time about it, but I guess like especially since then, how have you navigated that space, especially as unfortunately, like hateful content has been permitted more on the internet in so many places, I guess. Have you guys, wrangled your values there? And I'm not endorsing putting hateful content anywhere, to be clear.
That's fair. So, this is before my time.
Okay, yeah.
In 2022, I've certainly spent a lot of time on reasoning about it. And so I think it is always a very challenging environment to be operating a UGC platform, first and foremost. You have different religions, you have different people, you have different ethos. But I think in general, the previous owners of the business had pretty hard stances on, not having any hateful content. I think that remains intact in the way that we are operating the company today. We have upsized the community team and the moderation team significantly after taking over the business. We are thinking a lot about how we can expand upon that. So thinking more long term about building a group of people who are not NexusMods employees, but who are contributors in the community, about it like an open source group as well, who can actually help shape the form of how we are moderating in the future as well. And that is particularly important when you just think about the opportunity that we sit within, and also the dynamic changes that happens from new technologies that are coming on, where all of a sudden creation of mods has become exponentially easiher, and that creates a whole other series of problems with AI generated content or deep fakes and whatnot. So I think it is something that we are taking very seriously, and we're thinking about getting inspiration again from the open source community about creating a group of people that are not necessarily employed by NexusMods or have any financial incentives in any shape or form, but that can help us guide some of those challenging and difficult decisions that you from time to time have to make.
Yeah. And it's funny, or as you were listening, what you said earlier about open source and steering communities, was ringing in my head, as you were sort of laying that out, and it made me think about how, for one, I have to say, like, I think, so many companies run, like player community councils. These are, players, players, true at the end of the day, when we're all making things for players, when we're centering players, they're the ones who are going to be able to communicate their values, their wants, their needs. That's certainly, and modders, creators here too, for you guys, to be clear. But I observe that when it comes to open source, and as I've watched different open source communities adapt to the challenges of a changing internet and a changing who is on the internet, who is communicating on the internet. Open source, celebrates, this is such a tension, it seems, where open source, celebrates openness, celebrates choice, celebrates, it is your machine, your code, you should have as much control over it as you can. But the tension between like allowing all that control and what that control is used for, if you will, like where unfortunately hateful people desire to take this sometimes. It's hard, and it's been interesting. I feel like the whole open source community has been reckoning with this in the last decade in a way that might have been easier to sort of like, all right, we'll table that one for later, in like the 1990s or whatever, early 2000s. But it feels like everyone's been forced to reckon with this in a greater way, I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? There will always be bad actors And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that NexusMods is a safe place where people can come and have great experiences playing the games that they want, shape them in somewhat of the way that they want. I do think it's also important, being realistic about the types of content that can come on the platform. Talking about AI content,
Yeah.
talking about more explicit content.
Yeah.
You know, um, a very let's use the word for what it is, but a company that is a pornographic or a porno
Yeah.
business, it requires different values than what let's call it a UGC platform that has focused on video games requires. It's just fundamentally two different beliefs. And so we believe in a world on building a UGC platforms that will be used by hundreds of millions of people along the line. And so that requires us to always be, both flexible, but also make sure that people are protected and that those bad actors don't get to influence the company too much. And it's why we're continuous to invest into, increasing staff, particularly around moderation and community, because it is just challenging. And one of the challenges is that a machine has a hard time, reasoning about what may be completely fine in Grand Theft Auto may be very different from a semantic of The Sims. And so it can be difficult for a computer to reason about that. And there you need still human judgment. And so it is a challenging thing, and it is something that we are spending a significant amount of time on doing right. And I think it's fair to say, for the few people listening in, that we will make mistakes. And so that's the powerful thing of the community and being open source, is that we will get to know when we make mistakes, and then we will cross correct and do our best.
Yeah, it's I mean, we've seen this in the last year, right? Pardon me if I need to step through a train of thought from it, which is one, whether it's through some friends of mine or what I see on the internet, is like modding as a means of exploring adult content, of more content that, certainly would never have shipped in the base game, is a thing people desire. Platforms have faced pressure from payment providers who also, by the way, don't want to acknowledge they're the ones doing it. But they're facing pressure from payment providers, who are facing pressure from governments when it comes to adult content. And this is such a challenging problem for everyone to solve, even when everyone's working on good faith, right? Even when no one's trying to be judgmental, because this is such a place where people find creativity, they find fulfillment. It's not it is. I have felt sympathy for everyone involved, I suppose, in many ways, trying to navigate the space, especially when this pressure is coming down for justifiable reasons, right? Like we're talking.
Absolutely, and it's a very tricky balance. I think the thing we can do as a company is that we can be proactive, and we can be at the forefront of making sure that we gate the right content for the right people, work with regulatory requirements, make sure that with the new Online Safety Act in the UK, now they are being requested to show their ID if they want to come and watch adult content. And those are the type of things that we as a platform can continue to invest and improve within. And obviously, guardrails are set by the law, and that is typically the way that we're thinking about navigating around in the space. Also, with the caveat that we are not a porn business, we are a UGC platform, and we think about it through the lenses of having a very important role in terms of protecting that and making sure that the bad actors are limited, despite it being challenging.
Yeah, and then we're just back to I believe the Supreme Court saying the three-pronged test that partly comes back to I know when I see it, and that's like you said, what a human machine can know that a machine is not. Machines aren't there yet, and whether they have the capability to be is a philosophical debate. Let's steer towards. I'd like to steer towards a lighter topic. for someone like, you said you and I just, like you talked about modding Counter-Strike, we were shooting the shit about, World of Warcraft plugins and stuff. What mods have been used for has evolved so much and in such interesting ways over the years. Like what now to the point, with Sky Oblivion, right? And this amazing, like, people just going, hey, we're just going to make our own game. And it's like, oh, are you going to make your own game? And no, we're going to make a whole fan game. And it's like, but how? And then they just do it. From your perch, like you said, you arrived at NexusMods after 2022, but you've obviously followed and watched and observed modding change over time. Like, what from your perch is a really cool trend in what players are using mods to do? What they're using UGC to do, I guess. Like, what is something that's really like you've been like, I didn't expect that. Oh, that's cool. Like, what's tickled you on that front?
Look, I think just to start with the Sky Oblivion, I'm a big believer in the team there. I know they are a few years into development. I think that's fair to say, and we're all very excited about that. Hitting the floor. I think some of the things that I find quite intriguing in this space is how you see, very, very big sort of reorchestration of an entire game coming together, supported by many, many different volunteers in the communities. I think, from the small, let's call it Counter-Strike skins or other types of cosmetics to actual, let's talk about completely new experiences.
Yeah.
I think that is a very interesting dynamic that I actually couldn't have thought of, 10 years ago, that would be sort of the shape that this is actually taking. And I think, from having people who contribute with audio, other people who are contributing with, capability of storytelling and other ones, with coding capabilities or design. I think seeing some of these, big mods that actually comes together has been phenomenal, and it's one of the things that we are quite excited about at NexusMods, which we launched, which is called it's basically a mod list, but it's collections, right? Big new experiences. It's UGC with UGC on top of it, and that is just so cool to be a part of providing infrastructure that can support some of these creative people who are contributing to the ecosystem. So those are the experiences that I enjoy myself the most.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and answer my own question because to me, like, for our listeners at home, when I look at mods, a while back, someone asked me what I thought, like, the future of games would be. And I think the smartest answer you can give to that question is, I have no idea. And the second smartest answer you can give is something, like, instead of trying to, follow a trend, you just sort of like listen to yourself and think, well, what do I want to see in the future? So that's some advice for people at home to take it or leave it. And something I think I got right, but not to toot my own horn, is mods as performance. We have what jumps to mind is Tom Walker, this comedian who was playing Grand Theft Auto 4 with traffic up to the max, and he was streaming it. And it's so funny. It is like trying to play GTA 4, trying to get through the story of GTA 4 when every car is moving at speeds, that were never intended for the game. And you can do that, because thanks to modding, you can sort of take this speed system and just go, what if we ticked these numbers up, right? Like, it's a very subtle mod. And I heard about this on podcasts. I heard on all these different podcasts I listened to, people were referring to this. They were like laughing. And I've seen this elsewhere. I've sort of seen like another big one would be Monster Factory, from the McElroy brothers, where sometimes they're just doing it with the base creator, sometimes they're doing it with mods, where they are using modifications to games as sort of a means to like perform and express and play for an audience, with otherwise. And I only kind of, if it weren't for Monster Factory, I have to admit, they're the ones who, when I first saw them, I was like, oh, I think this is part of the future of interactive play. And seeing, NexusMods be a home for some of these things, it's so crazy, right? And I think it sort of shows that you don't need a big mod. Your mod does not need to be the biggest thing in the world. What your players make, what creators make on NexusMods or Steam Workshop or even the UGC platforms like Roblox and Minecraft, they don't need to be the most dramatic, intricate things to really like make a difference in people's lives, even if that difference is, they're just laughing for a bit, because in the end it's games, right? Like sometimes your base level of success is, did you make someone feel good? So that was my little ramble about what I've truly enjoyed coming, out of your world, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's very that's very great to hear, and certainly it is, both a great experience to see the very sort of developed experiences that are effectively new games, but also the sort of small tweaks that makes makes you smile a little bit more on a Friday evening when you sit and play.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Victor, I will leave you with one last question, which is, for, our audience of professionals, for, folks like you who are in the world of, making great things that, as we just talked about, bring players joy or terrify them or make them think harder about the world. Is there anything you sort of would want to say to the folks at large who you haven't gotten to talk with, right? For the folks you haven't gotten to have conversations with about the future of NexusMods, about this, this UGC vision you have. Is there anything you want to say to them before we wrap up today?
Well, I think we're quite firm on sort of the vision that we're going after. I think there's still a lot of things that we have to figure out along the way, and with that in mind, we will make mistakes. So please bear with us as we make mistakes out there. I want to appreciate, all the people who are contributing in the community. I want to appreciate all the people who are coming here to the office on a daily basis, and just say that I'm thankful for being a part of sort of shaping the future of Nexus. While we have been around for more than 2 decades, it just feels like we are getting started. And I think we are at a very interesting sort of moment in time where just like every big company have AI strategies, if you actually read between the lines, every big gaming company have a UGC strategy. And I think we sit at the core of that and have a very big responsibility of protecting what makes Nexus very special. And we'll continue to invest into that every day.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today.
Of course. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Victor for joining us on the Game Developer Podcast. Just one last bit of commentary. The question of NexusMods' decision on whether to host hateful content is interesting because, like you said, it's an open source company. They don't want to decide what does or doesn't appear on the site. Their community decides that. But the community spoke up. They didn't want hateful content on NexusMods. That sure tells us something about the very hardcore players who drive certain video game communities, doesn't it? Anyway, today's episode of the Game Developer Podcast was edited by Pierre Landreau, and our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks so much for listening.